You wake up with a start from your chattering teeth and grumbling stomach. The snow has started up again, threatening to break down your already shaky shelter. You look to your left and you see your family, and you think about all the choices you've made to get you here, the hundreds of miles you've traveled, the sacrifices you've had to make. Rescuers are sure to come. All that's left is hope. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is just a place where we can talk about true crime, spooky, scary stories, dark history, or anything else I got going on in my brain. It's been a whirlwind of a week if you are in America, or I guess anywhere in the world. So I thought this week we would talk about some people that went through the hardest of times and still came out alive on the other side. Today we are going to be talking about the infamous Donner Party. And girly, I did not know much about this case, much about this story, but it's a wild ride. So grab a little drink, grab a little snacky, and let's get into the Donner Party. The 1800s brought forth this taste for expansion thanks to the Louisiana Purchase. This $15 million steal made by Thomas Jefferson in 1803 basically doubled the size of the United States and gave settlers the opportunity to go west and swoop up new land. And if you're like me and was basically forced to take American history in high school, then you know the concept of manifest destiny, the idea that God gave the settlers this land to spread their customs and belief throughout the entire new country. So by the 1840s, a hefty 7 million people had used the Oregon and California trails to move west. And by now, it was relatively safe to do so. Some of these people that were interested in moving west were both the Donner and the Reed families. George Donner was a 62-year-old farmer who at the time was living in Springfield, Illinois with his wife and 3 children. He had already moved 5 times, but with all the buzz about California and all the great opportunities there, he thought a 6th move might work in his favor. James Reed was a very smart and successful businessman in Illinois, but he assumed that if he was able to move west, his business would boom even more. And on top of that, his wife Margaret had these constant, grueling migraines, and so they figured that moving to a warmer, better climate might also alleviate her pain. So James, Margaret, and their 3 children decided to move west. In mid-April of 1846, the Donner and Reed family, along with a number of teamsters, which were basically people that could drive wagons, and some employees as well, set off westward from Springfield, Illinois. The first month of the journey was pretty uneventful, and soon they pulled into Independence, Missouri. Now, it's really important to understand that by this time in the 1800s, settlers had a very good idea of the timeline that needed to happen in order to get to California. For example, they knew that they had to leave by April, and this ensured that their oxen would have enough grass, enough food to last them through the journey. And they also had to make sure that they got west before the snow hit the Sierra Mountains. It did appear that some of the settlers were a little bit disgruntled with how late of a start they got, because even though the Donner and Reed party left in April, it was still cutting it a little bit close. Like, these people needed all the time that they could get to account for anything that might go awry while they were on their journey. I even got a quote from one of the settlers that stated, "I'm beginning to feel alarmed at the tardiness of our movements, and fearful that winter will find us in the snowy mountains of California." That being said, on May 12th of 1846, 50 wagons, including the Donner and Reed families, took off from Missouri on their way to their next stop, which was going to be Fort Laramie, and this was located in eastern Wyoming. Once there, they were going to regroup and then take the California Trail through the rest of Wyoming, up through Idaho, and then down through Nevada, and ending up in sunny Sacramento. That was the plan. They were on track, okay? But there was this little idea that was tugging the group away from the beaten path, and that was the concept of the Hastings cutoff. So let's talk about the man of the hour that created this new shortcut to California. Lansford Hastings grew up in Ohio, and by age 27, he had become a successful lawyer, but he wanted to do more. So in 1846, he decided to move west to Oregon, and he ultimately ended up in California. Once he saw the immense opportunities that were on this west coast, he decided to write a book for the settlers called The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In his guide, he talked about how this new trail took a hearty 300 miles off the westward journey by taking a different route through Wyoming and Nevada before connecting back up with the California Trail. What was funny about this whole situation, though, was that Lansford had only traveled on this shortcut a handful of times, and he had never done it with wagons. And it's a lot different to take, this trail by horseback and to take it with multiple wagons. It's like a whole different thing. So why he even put it in this book, I don't know, girly.
If you could do it on a horse, I'm sure that you could do it with a wagon. How hard could it possibly be?
And to make matters worse, he actually started advertising to people by sending riders out on horseback to hand out letters touting the amazingness of the Hastings cutoff. So as the Donner and Reed families were pulling into Fort Laramie, they were strongly considering taking the Hastings cutoff. As if a bad omen of things to come, Reed actually was confronted by one of his old friends who had actually just taken the Hastings cutoff west to east. He informed Reed that taking the Hastings cutoff was a horrible idea, especially with wagons, because the terrain was so rough throughout that entire area. The party set off on their next leg of the journey without really knowing what path they were going to take. Then on July 17th, a man pulled up on horseback with a letter personally from Lansford Hastings telling anyone that he would meet them at Fort Bridger if they wanted to take his shortcut. 3 days later, the group came upon the Little Sandy River, and a choice had to be made. The Donner and Reed families decided that they would take their luck with the Hastings shortcut because they were already running a little bit behind schedule. So they, along with 20 other wagons, had to appoint a new leader. And they ended up picking George Donner because he was, for one, an American, and also he was just more likable than James Reed. On that day, the group consisted of 87 people made up of 29 men, 15 women, and 43 children. They had made their choice, and there was no turning back. Once the Donner party arrived at Fort Bridger, they started looking around for Lansford Hastings, but it turns out that he had actually left the fort about a week before with a different party of wagons. But thankfully, he was so very kind enough to leave some instructions for anybody else that wanted to tag along behind. The group decided to spend a few days just resting up, gathering supplies before setting off on the Hastings cutoff. The group was pretty optimistic as they set off on July 31st. James Reed noted that they hoped to make it to California in about 7 weeks, and they were on track to do that. At first. That is until they hit their first obstacle, which was the Wasatch Mountains. This mountain range, although beautiful, is filled with deep canyons and high peaks. And the group figured this out when they tried to cross one of the canyons, but they just could not. Their trail was completely blocked. They were lucky enough to stumble upon a letter that Lansford had left for them, and it said, hey, guys, I think you should just wait here until I can come back and take you on a safe route. But they were already behind schedule, so James Reed decided to forge ahead on horseback to try to find Lansford Hastings. It took Reed about 5 days to catch up to Lansford, and when he told him about their situation, Lansford was basically like, I am not going to go back with you guys. You guys are going to have to wait until I can get this group safely there, and then I'll come back for you guys. And Reed was like, no, that's not an option. But Lansford refused to budge. All he did was point out what could be a better path for the Donner party. As you might imagine, this path that Lansford pointed out wasn't actually a trail of any kind. So the Donner party literally had to hack through brush, move boulders out of the way just to be able to get their wagons through. And this added a 2-week delay onto their trip. By the time they got through this mountain range, they had to stop for a couple days just to restock up on supplies and rest their oxen a little bit because their next obstacle was going to be even worse. The Donner party was going to have to cross the Great Salt Lake Desert. Now, this is a 4,000 square foot stretch of land in Utah that has extremely hot temperatures during the day, plummeting temperatures at night, and a peppering of mountain ranges throughout. Lansford assured the group that it would only take 2 days to get through this desert, so the Donner Party set off with high hopes on August 30th. But it became obvious very quickly that this was not just a little jaunt through Utah, okay? Their wagon wheels kept getting stuck in this gunky, wet sand that is very prevalent in this desert. Many families had to abandon their wagons, and on top of this, a number of oxen ran away, got lost, so some of the families wasted precious time searching for their cattle. By the third day, they had completely run out of water. When they finally emerged from the sandy abyss a full 5 days later, some people were close to dying from dehydration. 26 oxen had been lost, and they were low on their food rations. The group was devastated by their losses. Some started to curse Lansford for not accurately portraying the hardships of the desert. At this point, they had no choice but to send 2 men ahead to California on horseback in hopes that they would be able to bring back more supplies to them. By the time the group connected back up with the California Trail, it was late September. All of the other wagon parties had already made it safely to California. This Hastings cutoff had added a full 125 miles onto their trip and delayed them a full month. The Donner Party knew that if they were going to make it to California before winter, they were going to have to haul ass through the Sierra Mountains. And so they decided to split up into 2 smaller groups just to try to make up for that lost time. The morale of the group was at an all-time low, and it was only made worse when 2 wagons got tangled up, and these wagons were owned by James Reed and John Snyder. Reed, assessing the situation, came up on horseback and started a verbal argument with John Snyder. This verbal spat soon turned into a physical altercation where Snyder was hitting Reed on the head with a whip. So in defense, Reed took out his hunting knife and fatally stabbed Snyder in the chest. This was obviously unprecedented for the group, so there was a bit of discourse on how they should proceed. Some wanted Reed to be hung on the spot for his sins, but others thought that they should just wait until they got to California where a court could legally try him. It was ultimately decided that James Reed would be banished from the rest of the group, so he was forced to leave alone on horseback with one of his employees. He continued westward towards California, forced to leave his wife and children behind. As the company crossed into California, things were looking more bleak than ever. The next leg of their journey through the Sierra Nevada mountains was going to be some of the trickiest terrain that they've encountered. This mountain range, again, gorgeous, but it has over 500 peaks, and it gets snow kind of early, and they were cutting it really, really close. To make matters worse, the group had been attacked by the Paiute Native American tribe, and they had stolen lots of their remaining oxen. So this forced the group to basically bury any of their possessions that weren't absolutely necessary just to lighten the load. Finally, some good news on October 19th, as one of the men that was sent along to California for supplies had come back with 7 mules filled up with provisions, along with 2 Native American guides named Salvador and Louis. Then on Halloween of 1846, the group came upon their next obstacle. Their path was entirely blocked by snow. And of course, there weren't a lot of data points of snowfall averages from that area in the 1800s, but this is known to be one of the snowiest places in the United States. And accounts from that time stated that the path was blocked by several feet of snow. So as unappealing as it was, the group was forced to make a shelter just to try to ride out the winter. These 3 pine log cabins were set up along a place called Truckee Lake, and they were going to have to house 60 settlers for however long the snowstorm was going to last. And you know, they didn't really have a lot of time to set up these shelters, so they were made out of pine logs with flat roofs, and they let in all the rain, all the snow, all the moisture into the cabin itself. And so they used whatever animal hides they had to kind of patch up the roof as time went along. The Donner family was trailing behind the rest of the group because they had a wagon accident that they had to deal with. So they ended up setting up their cabin a little bit more east near a place called Alder Creek. As the party hunkered down, it continued to snow nonstop for 8 days. At this point, all of the oxen had either been slaughtered for food or had been lost in the flurries. Then, on December 15th, one of the first deaths occurred within the camp. One of Reed's employees, a man named Bayless William, died of malnutrition. The following day, 15 members of the Donner Party, including 10 men and 5 women, ventured out into the blistering cold on makeshift snowshoes made out of ox hides and yokes, which are like the thing that you put over oxen to have them like pull a wagon. They made snowshoes out of those, and they were going to try to get to California to get some help. They didn't have enough food. The conditions were horrible, but they carried on. In the most dire of circumstances, when they ran out of what little food they did have, they had to grasp the grim reality that they might have to resort to cannibalism. The idea of drawing straws for a sacrifice was tossed around, or even having 2 of the men fight in a duel to the death. But it never came to that, because soon the elements started to pick off people one by one. The hikers took the bodies, separated the flesh from the bones, and dried it in the sun. It was horrific, but they didn't have any choice. Salvador and Louis were part of this small group, and they refused to partake in the cannibalism. And they were actually getting very nervous that they were going to be somebody's next meal. So to avoid their fate, they decided to go off on their own. But a few days later, the rest of the hikers stumbled upon the 2 Native American guides, and they were laying in the snow just so close to death. In a desperate act of survival, one of the hikers, a man named William Foster, shot both of the men in the head, and they ate their bodies. 33 days after leaving the camp, 7 of the 15 hikers came out alive in the Sacramento Valley. This group was later named the Forlorn Hope. It was decided that something had to be done to help the surviving members of the Donner Party, so a 7-member rescue crew set out from Fort Sutter on January 31st of 1847. Horses and oxen could not travel through the deep snow, so the men had to trudge through on foot, carrying as much as they could on their backs. But against all odds, all of the rescue crew got to the camp by February 18th. By this time, the Donner Party was almost completely out of food. They had killed all of their oxen, all of their dogs. Then they resorted to chewing on the bones and making soup out of the bones, but soon even that became scarce. They resorted to taking off the ox hides from their roofs and even boiling down leather and making it into this weird, like, gunky paste. But that was better than nothing. Once those options ran out, they started stripping and chewing on the bark of the trees that surrounded the camp. People were passing from malnutrition on the daily. 13 had already died and were just buried loosely in the snow outside the camp. But hope was renewed when that first rescue party was seen. It was later recounted that one party member said to the rescue team, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" when she first saw them appear. There was a small problem, though. This tiny little rescue crew couldn't take everybody back to California with them. So on this first run, only 23 surviving Donner Party members were taken back to Sacramento. And just because they got rescued didn't mean that they were out of the woods yet, because these surviving malnutritioned people had to walk from the camp all the way to Sacramento. So multiple people did die on this journey home. And it was the remaining Donner Party members left at the camp that had to resort to desperate measures. Even the most unappealing food options were out of the question at this point. They had to resort to eating the frozen dead bodies that were strewn around the camp. They had no other option. This doesn't mean that everybody resorted to cannibalism, but it was recounted that about half of the survivors did, just to stay alive. One of the rescuers from the second relief party later stated that the members of the Donner Party resembled more demon than they did man. They were skin and bone. There were just body parts strewn all over the camp. Families had to watch their now deceased loved ones be mutilated and mangled just to keep the survivors alive and kicking. The rescuers got to the final survivor at the camp on April 12th of 1847. He was a Prussian man named Louis Kiesberg, and it was stated that when they did finally get to him, he was half crazy and he just had bones and body parts strewn out all around him. After all was said and done, some people believed that Louis murdered the rest of the survivors at Truckee Lake just to stay alive, but this fact was never proven. All in all, 41 people passed away, 5 before they got stranded, 36 at the camp, and 1 at Fort Sutter. But it is important to note that there were 46 survivors, including all of the Donner children and the entirety of the Reed family. James Reed and his family decided to settle in San Jose, and he continued to be a very successful businessman. He got into real estate, he managed a fruit farm, and then the following year he struck rich with gold. In a letter to their family back east, one of the Reed children said that they shouldn't let their experience deter them from traveling to California, which is a bold statement. People back in the day were just built different, because if I experienced this and made it out alive on the other end, I'd be like, hey, why don't you just stay in the East, okay? You don't need all this. It's not worth it. I don't know what California was like back then, but it must have been great, because I don't think anything could get me to suggest people to go on the same route I did. Oh my goodness. Once news about the horrors of the Donner Party started to spread, you would think that people would kind of be, I don't know, a little bit nervous to come west, but that just wasn't the case. Because about a year after all of this happened, a couple of men struck rich with gold near Sacramento, and that caused an even bigger influx of people to the Golden State. And it turned the story of the Donner Party into more of a cautionary tale than anything else. Believe it or not, Lansford Hastings ended up abandoning the idea of the Hastings cutoff and instead moved to San Francisco, where he began to practice law again. After the Civil War, Lansford ended up writing another book called The Emigrant's Guide to Brazil. And people say karma isn't real, but I don't know, because Lansford Hastings ended up dying soon after this while he was on an expedition in South America. I'm not mad. I was like vigorously researching this case, and I was like, what kind of jail sentence did Lansford Hastings get? Nothing, nada, not a thing. I'm like, I don't know. You basically killed 41 people, including multiple children. So like, I don't know, 1800s. I really enjoyed researching this case. I don't know why, but I did not know much about the Donner Party. I just assumed that they were on the California Trail and got fucked up. But no, that Lansford Hastings, you know? What a fucker. But anyway, that's that. I would like to shout out my mom for suggesting this topic. Great suggestion. If anybody has suggestions on videos, I will always take them, because if you guys are interested in hearing a story, it's probably pretty darn cool, and I probably also want to know about it. So always feel free to shoot suggestions my way. The video is over. If you want to leave, you can. Bye. Thanks for watching. But I just want to take the time now, while it's still kind of fresh in my mind, to just say a few things about what's happened in the last week. You know, it's been a weird time in America. I'm not trying to get political about it. You know, this isn't the place really, but I do just have to say, like, if the results of the election has made people feel a certain type of way, I understand. I was having a lot of emotions about it. But I've come to the conclusion that me personally, I really want to make the next 4 years about changing things for the better, about moving forward even when it feels like we can't. So I want to say, if you feel like your rights are at risk, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. We are going to get through this together. If you are in the queer community, I feel you. We're going to get through this. If you are in the trans community, I feel you. We're going to get through this. If you're a woman or have women reproductive organs, I feel your pain. We're going to get through this. We got to support each other. We got to build a really strong community. So always feel free to reach out to me, DM me. My Instagram and TikTok are on my main channel page. Feel free to reach out. Well, we got to be strong. We got to rise up. We got to be in it together. So let's do this. Let's move forward. I'm trying not to live in the past. What's done is done, and people have made their choice, and that's okay. But we got to keep fighting that good fight, baby. So anyway, stay strong. Got this. I love you. I feel for you. We got this, okay? Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe, comment below, anything really, that's fine. I love to hear from you guys, so keep the comments coming on in. Yeah, take care of yourself today. Make sure you're drinking some water. Make sure that you eat something, anything. Yeah, I love you guys. I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah, keep being the bad bitches that you are. Goodbye, guys.